Hello and welcome to a very special podcast series, Unusual Suspects. I'm your host, Gaurav Chaudhary. This is a series about unraveling stories of entrepreneurs, investors, and businesses that are disruptors, yet not in your face. Their disruptions have consistently delivered on the purpose and the mission they embark on. Their values are as strong as the mission. While they're ruthless in pursuing their ambition, they don't stray from being leaders who are not just admired for the vision and relentless pursuit, but also for how they're building an ecosystem of believers who consistently push the boundaries. They allow principles to take precedence over ad hocism. For them, profitability is as important as scale, creating and leading new categories and innovations. In each episode, I speak to one such leader or leaders, talking to her or him or them about their business, lives, inspirations, interests, challenges, pivot moments and turning points, successes, failures, agonies and ecstasies, and of course, frustrations. It is as much about their personal life stories as about their entrepreneurial journeys. Unusual Suspects streams on Earshot.in, Spotify.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, MoneyControl.com, and a host of other podcast streaming platforms. For this episode, I'm delighted to have Abhishek Mohan, founder and CEO Hempstreet and founding member PIMCHA, which is Pan-India Medical Cannabis and Hemp Association, and Delzaad Deolaliwala, co-founder and chief legal officer Bombay Hemp Company and Chairman PIMCHA. PIMCHA's mandate is to advise, support and fulfill the needs of its members in understanding their regulatory framework and help them in the production and marketing of medical cannabis and hemp products. This is a sector dominated by multiple regulations and often makes news for the wrong reason. But there is also a very exciting startup community that is working in the industry, optimistic about its prospects despite the current challenges. Welcome to Unusual Suspects, Delzaad and Abhishek.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gaurav, for having us here.
Hi, Gaurav. Thanks a lot for having us.
Okay, Delzaad, first to you. The stated mission of PIMCHA, and I'm quoting, is to promote the growth of a responsible, sustainable and inclusive medical cannabis and hemp industry and work for a favorable social, economic and regulatory environment for the industry throughout India. How far have you been successful on this front?
Thank you for that question. Just a background to understand more about what the association does, which is Pan-India Medical Cannabis and Hemp Association, was formed in 2022 with the mission to bring all the credible and Indian leaders of cannabis business, specifically from the hemp and the medical side of the business, where the concentration is in different aspects of the industry, which is textile, food, cosmetics, medical, and also building material, plastic and all. We have a group of 30 companies that have come together to form this association with the primary motive is to bring more credibility to the industry, to drive the right kind of policy matters for the government to basically implement it and to make sure that there is a proper guideline to work in this industry. And most importantly, making the market bigger, more credible, and actually larger compared to other countries, because India has a great opportunity to make this a multi-billion crop, which is what other countries have already been taking advantage of. So in a nutshell, as an association, we want to be the driving force to the right stakeholders, to the right government departments, to right authorities, to make sure that the voice is heard, to make sure that there is legitimacy that we are proving in this industry. Because cannabis is always looked at in a very different manner, more of a skeptical, more of a negative point of view. But today as an association, what we have been driving is only to change the narration, the acceptance, the knowledge of cannabis all over the country. And that is what we have been forming this association together with this primary purpose. And what we have done, Gaurav, in this, in the last 1 year is something that is really commendable, where we have brought a lot of credible policies to different state governments, where it is still not finalized as a cabinet measure, but there is a lot of positive acceptance from the government departments. And I'm talking about both central government, where the most important departments like CBN, Central Bureau of Narcotics, NCB, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Textiles, Agriculture, that is, and also Health, where there's a lot of positive acceptance that cannabis is going to be a very important medical and industrial crop in the country, and also to the state departments, primarily the north and the northeast states where there's a lot of acceptance of it, specifically Uttarakhand, Himachal, Manipur, Meghalaya, and also other states which are there. Where the main objective is to give them the right kind of a policy understanding, because sometimes it gets very confusing on where to start when it comes to cannabis policies. It is central government or a state government, and where does the power lies? To just give you an understanding, if the central government has clearly given powers under the NDPS Act to the state governments to implement, and these are sections of Section 10 and the 14 of the NDPS Act, which clearly states all the governing powers to the state governments to actually implement it. So that is what we have been doing with this policy part, where all the government authorities have been bringing confidence and credibility. And most importantly, what we have been doing for the industry is making sure that there are guidelines, there are structures, there are right kind of point of views that have been showcased in the form of knowledge, in the form of, I would say, proper legal aspects, where we have been giving them packaging, selling, distribution, possession. RTIs have been filed with many different departments to make sure that there is knowledge being understood from the departments and governed to our many stakeholders, and also doing a lot of external work regarding testing parameters to make sure that there is proper guidelines of doing that. There are board of advisors that we have brought into the association who are experts from different fields, who understand what is the narcotic, how a cannabis or an opium plant is dealt with, and how the legalities around it works. And the most important stakeholders for us are the doctors and the patients. And that is what we have been doing with the association also, where we have got a lot of trials with different stakeholders of the industry to perform clinical trials, to perform a lot of seminars with the doctors to spread the right awareness of cannabis, because that is the main target area that we want to concentrate on the industry, is basically changing the lives of patients and to make sure that cannabis becomes a very good option or a material to have any kind of efficacies in different ailments that we're talking about. So bringing these stakeholders together, bringing R&D together, and making sure that there is a right kind of an external environment of testing and advisors, and also working with international associations, is the primary work that as an association we have done. And we really believe that we have a lot of work more to do, of course, to make the market more viable, to make the industry more viable. But the first step is to make sure the legalities are taken care of. There's a proper security of this industry working together. And that is what we have been doing, liaising with the government and with the important stakeholders to get this together. Today, there are 30 members that we are all speaking together. I believe there will be 300 more in the next 2 years, because that is what is required as a strength and consensus to make this industry a very good opportunity for market and for export potentials also, and make India the powerhouse for cannabis industry in the country.
Yeah. Thanks, Delzaad, for this very elaborate context setting. Abhishek, to you, from wellness products to cookies to smoothies, the use of seed and leaf derivatives of cannabis are increasingly becoming more and more commonplace in India. But that said, the mention of cannabis invariably still conjures of images of intoxication. Is there an image problem, and how do we get around this? What's your view on this?
Yeah, so I think we haven't, it hasn't been many years since the NDPS Act, right? I mean, Delzaad is a young man, but I was basically born a little bit before I was born before the NDPS Act was enacted. So it hasn't even been one generation, right? So from going from something that was very much was freshly frowned upon, and I would say excessively heavy-handedly dealt with. So while you see now a lot more acceptance, primarily because globally hemp protein, hemp seed products are quite ubiquitous, I would say, in most countries, except I guess in Hong Kong where they're pulling back. But I think because of that, there is a general consumer understanding, and just by the growth of some of the members of our association that are looking at the nutritional side, there is consumer acceptance. Of course, certain sections of society and I would say law enforcement is still kind of coming out of that hangover of excessive policing. So definitely there is some, but I mean, Delzaad will agree with me. I think we, from like 2 or 3 years ago to today, it's been a sea change in terms of perception. So yeah, is there Is there a bit of a stigma? Yes, there is. But is there a lot more change and acceptance from, say, 3 or 4 years ago? Absolutely. So,
Oh, yes.
so I'd say there's been more good, right? From something that's kind of illegal, that was perceived as illegal, to something that you're buying online now. I think that's a huge step which we should, kind of understand and give credit to.
Already a lot of cultural acceptance of cannabis in many parts of our country, be it for religious purpose, be it for consumption also, where hemp seed oil was always used by the state of Uttarakhand in making oil, seed preparations and food preparations, and even using chutneys and oil for their skincare purpose. So there was a lot of understanding of it. What we are doing as an industry is bringing the rural understanding, or more of a primitive understanding, to a proper business scale of business understanding to the people that we are working together with, and making sure that there's a pathway of getting that rural acceptance to a business acceptance. There has always been understanding of cannabis in the country. It's just that there are many pockets that has always showcased or limited it to, and now we are bringing that knowledge to everyone, and there's a lot of acceptance from it, because global data and global markets have always opened up, as hemp foods and hemp seed and hemp oil and cosmetics, and also medical. The same thing is now being looked at upon India, and that is what the main push is from the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Delzaad, my next question, of course, is to you only, and it's about the current problems. Currently, for the industry, the problem appears to be that cannabis is governed by multiple government authorities and regulations to ensure safety and prevent misuse. So that is the state position for creating these regulations, erecting these regulations and rules. There's also, however, a fear and stigma associated with this. Say, for instance, if I'm a farmer, or if I'm a producer, or if I'm a large pharmaceutical company, I'll be resistant towards it because of the stigma associated with cannabis use. Now, because who would want to be on the wrong side of the tax department or the police authorities, for instance? So this is a bit of a complex problem. For the industry, what is the incentive to be in this space given these conditions? The risks seem to far outweigh the rewards at this point, isn't it?
That is the global understanding, and also the Indian context. That kind of a perception is definitely there, because cannabis, again, being policed by through so many departments under the NDPS, any officer, from a narcotic officer to a customs to a police, can actually question any business operator in this kind of industry. But more important here, Gaurav, is to understand the different parts of the plant, and that is what is going to be very important. When we talk about the seed, there is already a very formidable regulation that has been placed by the government when it comes to hemp seeds in the Food Safety Authority of India, FSSAI, which was passed last year in 2021, where there is a complete regulation to allow hemp seed, hemp food, using hemp oil and protein powder to be manufactured and to be sold in different parts, online or offline, in the country. So that kind of a regulation, makes a lot of security if any operator wants to do it in the hemp seed business. The second part, which is the hemp textiles, or the fiber part from the stock of the plant, is again a very lucrative, a very established form of a business, because, for example, textiles in China has been, and for hemp has been on for last 20 years, and it's a $1.2 billion industry only in hemp textiles. Why can't India take all advantages of it? And the laws regarding it and the policies regarding it is completely hassle-free, does not have any kind of illegalities or any kind of a regulation over here. Most importantly to note, both the seed and the fiber are out of the NDPS Act, are out of the Excise Act. So that becomes a very clear regulation that there is no government or no authority that is there who is going to clamp this down or stop you from any kind of business opportunity. And it can be import or export or any kind of manufacturing of these in the country. Of course, the most important point is that the cultivation of it has to be under licensed. It has to be given through a state department who has allowed it to cultivate it. So that is the most important backbone, that if seed and research is already strengthened, you can actually go and make these kind of products from the seed and the fiber without any hassle. The last part, which is the leaves, under which the medical cannabis industry today in India is something which is a state subject. How liquor, for example, is an excise department subject, the same thing is therefore cannabis leaf, which is bhang in all different languages that we know in Hindi. That is what is something that has to be looked at from a state-wise point of view. And that is exactly what the association is trying to do, to completely harmonize this, to completely make it a standard code for every state and the excise department to regulate cannabis leaves-based medicines or cannabis leaf based manufactured products under a very systematic or a very comprehensive form of regulation where there is no questions or loophole. A very simple example of essential narcotic drugs, which is exactly what the central government did in 2014, where they basically standardize anything to do with the narcotic drug, and the state has the power to implement that. The same thing is what we are trying to do for bhang, where there are states like UP, MP, Rajasthan who are already allowing it to manufacture, to actually make any kind of medicines out of it. And there's a complete acceptance of Ayurvedic medicines all over the country, where you do not require special licenses to sell or distribute. Our cannabis leaves comes under Schedule E1 of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act, which is very important to note because that has to be taken under medical supervision only. That is the only thing that has to be taken care of when you're selling it online on a basis of prescription. Otherwise, the industry, in a very common nutshell, to give you an understanding, is well poised with a lot of regulation clarity which has been achieved. Of course, there are a lot of states who are learning and developing those kind of clarity to implement it. But overall, whichever state knows about bhang, whichever state has been cultivating hemp or seed or the fiber of the plant, has a lot of clarity and acceptance regarding it. And that is what we are trying to do in association, to pass on the knowledge of the accepted states to the new learners and to the states who want to do it with the precedence that is already existing. And I believe in the next 2 years, there will be consistency. There will be a very fair operations that will happen in this country with legalities of cannabis all over, where all stakeholders of different departments of the government will have the same voice and the same narration to actually allow this industry to flourish.
Yes. Abhishek, coming to you, there is also the prospect of turning India into an innovation hub in this space. Do you think an uncertain policy environment is coming in the way of this? What needs to be done on this front?
See, I think I look at it from an opportunity perspective, right? I think just as Delzaad touched upon, and this is what I say when I speak abroad, is that basically India is a federally legal market when it comes to selling and distribution. Right? It's under prescription, but even America is not, right? And I always give the example of the fact that healthcare somewhere India should really be producing world-class products. Why? Because if you look at the growth of the IT industry in what 40 years, they've become what they have by selling cheaper goods, right? That was really, or BPO. It was essentially doing something cheaper. Infosys, whoever that. Now have guys like Freshworks, we have guys like SpotGraph, we have guys that are doing world-class products, software as a service products out of India. Now, the excuse for that was basically that Indian enterprises were not sophisticated enough to buy SaaS. So that took us 40 years. But in medical, the ailments that cannabis is looking out to solve, India is ground zero. Arthritis, when it comes to chronic pain, when it comes to sexual wellness, when it comes to menstrual pain. I mean, this applies to women all over the world. These are things that have a scale that certain continents don't have in terms of ailment base. So there's no real reason for us not to develop world-class products, primarily because the market is at home. And I think the same applies to cannabis. So we've seen the whole revolution happen in the US, which I will always underline has been a recreational phenomenon. It's been just like the end of prohibition was in the 20s. I don't know. It was basically when a post-prohibition euphoria. If you look at the tens of billions of market size that you have in North America, it's largely recreation. Now, the innovation in medical has been very, very tiny, I would say, which is illustrated by the large transactions that have happened for even single products like, Epidiolex, Sativex. These all turned into mega acquisitions because there was nothing else out there. And given that, the data that we've collected with Ayurvedic formulations, with polyherbal, which has become, the buzzword after COVID because people now want something that's also sustainable. If you look at what happened with antacids, we were popping it like candy as kids. Today, it carries a severe kidney damage label. So we don't know what these long-term, effects of a lot of the, age-old pharmaceutical products we take, come with. So I think there is this kind of perfect storm of people looking for something sustainable, India having a massive ailment base, a federally legal structure, and we are the pharmacy of the world, so we know how to manufacture. So I think these things together will put us in a position where we could be, exporting out world-class cannabis products that don't necessarily have to be the single molecule pharma type products. Because the world is now saying, even clinical trials, people are like, we need to accept, real world data, not
Right.
just clinical trials. So I think there is a perfect storm brewing. We just need to step up and believe in ourselves a little bit more. I think we're drawing if you look at TikTok, look at many countries that have disrupted the Western model.
Yeah.
Right? We need to think that way, not build clones. We need to think that way, and especially when we are such a large market. So yeah.
Absolutely. Delzaad, there's a lot of optimism riding on this year, 2023. The industry is hoping that it could finally get a go-ahead for the cultivation of cannabis for medical uses in a standardized manner. If this happens, this will ensure quality and tight supply chain to prevent diversion. What are your expectations on this? Do you think Uttarakhand could be the first state where this could happen?
Absolutely, Gaurav. I believe that the tide right now for medical cannabis is very strong, and there's very positive acceptance of it, as I mentioned, both from many states and the central government. Uttarakhand being the first state to actually allow industrial hemp policy to be executed in 2016 became a very important stepping stone, which paved a lot of understanding for different states. That is what I believe in 2023, with a lot of states already working and finalizing the medical cannabis policy under Section 10 of the NDPS Act, where most importantly, the central government also has given a go-ahead to a lot of states, saying that you have all the powers, and this is what was highlighted in the GLM versus the Union of India case, where the clear statement from the Ministry of Finance was clearly saying that there is a complete acceptance of cannabis and the powers have been given to the state to frame policies for any kind of medical or scientific purposes. So keeping those things in mind, we believe as an industry, Uttarakhand and many north and northeastern states are going to be finalizing these policies where the quality of the medical cannabis is going to be very standardized. Today, as we mentioned, the bhang which we get from the wild or feral cannabis does not have a good quality THC or CBD percentages. The other form of impurities in the plant is also to a higher level, and to make that affordable medicine is the most difficult challenge that the industry is facing. Once Uttarakhand or any other state, allows you to cultivate, we believe that the quality will be better, the price will be much conducive, and we are working towards a very great quality standardized product, which is what the patients and the doctors really want in this country. So I believe that the positioning of timing is perfect, and 2023 will be a great year when it comes to medical cannabis for the country.
Abhishek, there's also this debate about whether states should be empowered to frame their own laws and rules, or whether there should be one overarching central law that subsumes every aspect. Where do you stand on this?
So I think it depends on the aspect and the value chain, right? For example, I would, assuming legality aside, I would look at how in the US where Vermont makes cheese, or you get your oranges from California, or wherever there's a hub of cultivation, there's a hub of processing, and there's distribution around the country, right? So distribution today and sales is largely federally legalized. It's nationwide. Now, I would say state-wise would make sense, because if your distribution and your manufacturing and is licensed in a place, your distribution is legal nationwide. If R&D can be unlocked in the manner that it has been, say, in Israel. And second is, if the state has enough scale to cultivate and manufacture, as long as it's able to service the demand across the country, that you don't have to push all states to become, for example, in the southern states, it'll be a lot harder. So I would say having a cluster of cultivation, a cluster of manufacturing, and a distribution nationwide, as long as the patients get a responsibly dispensed, standardized, acceptable medicine, and the quality of raw materials able to be guaranteed by cultivation, then I would say federal would be ideal, but we've seen implementation differences when there's been something that's nationwide. So I would say state-wise would do, as long as it provides scale and stability.
Right. And Delzaad, cannabis cultivation comes under the NDPS, the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act. Do you think it is time to remove hemp from NDPS? And if so, why?
Again, Gaurav, the most important clarity point to the audience is that Section 14 of the NDPS Act allows hemp to be grown or cannabis to be grown for any kind of industrial horticulture purposes. So again, the central government in the NDPS completely gives the power to the state government to implement policies, which is where the state government of Uttarakhand, as I mentioned, has already done that. Most important point over here, how USA, for example, has made the hemp farm bill, The same thing can be replicated in India, where we can have a specific law to govern hemp and hemp-based products, where there's a perfect kind of THC percentage mentioned and all the regulations around it. So it becomes very standardized for every state to do it. Or the second most easy kind of an approach that this central government can do for NDPS is, for example, how morphine has a 0.2% limit. Anything above that is what morphine, for example, any produced from morphine, for example, is under NDPS. I repeat, 0.2% morphine is basically the standard which anything from the Narcotics or Psychotropic Substance Act follows, where below 0.2 is not under the NDPS and above it is on NDPS. The same thing can be approached for hemp, where anything below 0.3 could be a statement where anything 0.3% THC below is allowed to be, anything beyond the purpose of an NDPS Act, where there is no government rules or any kind of department who will clamp it down. And anything below 0.3%, again, a stakeholder example, it can be 0.3 to 0.5 to 1, where anything above that could be something that can be then governed by the NDPS Act. So these are the two main things that we believe, that the powers are given to the state, but the central government can make a very secured law to allow hemp-based products to be used below the 0.3% guideline, which will be out of the NDPS, and then the industry can really develop a lot when this kind of a guideline is passed. And the central government has the powers to do it specifically from those parliamentary committees and authorities to allow any kind of a law to be made around that. So once that is passed, we believe that could be a great win for the industry.
Abhishek, with cannabis having different varieties, sourcing the right quality of raw material becomes important. What is the kind of interest that pharmaceutical companies have shown in sourcing it for active pharmaceutical ingredients or APIs? Is there an export opportunity for India in the medicinal use of cannabis that one should not ignore?
Absolutely. I think really, again, the API side, you're probably referring to Dr. Reddy's. Yeah. So I think the absolute low-cost model or the back-end model of operation that we followed, being a cheaper pharmacy of the world, being the generics capital of the world, we're not. I think Teva is bigger than the Israeli Teva is bigger than all our generics manufacturers, I'm not mistaken. So I think the idea is there's an opportunity to create world-class products for export, not just APIs. APIs are great. I think API security is something India needs, which we realized during COVID that we were importing everything from China, and when they choked it, we were basically stuck. So I think API security is something we definitely need. But from an export perspective, like I said, there seems to be a perfect storm brewing where we can create world-class products in cannabis from India for the world.
Right. Delzaad, currently the products that your industry are producing have carved some space in the Ayurveda or the polyherbal industry segment. From an addressable market, that's a tiny fraction of the overall pharma industry. That said, there's a lot of excitement among startups. How's the funding scene in this space in India?
To be very honest, there is a lot of positive scenarios of funding when it comes to the Indian cannabis space, primarily from the family offices or more of a strategic alliances from international companies or Indian companies. Where it comes to, say, pharmaceutical alliances of many, major and big players who want to look at hemp as a important material for their, many medicines that they have actually developed. Or, for example, a textile space like an Arvind Mills who are wanting to, have a very specific range of denims from hemp. So any kind of these companies are someone who are the most front runners to actually look at investments or having kind of strategic alliances with a lot of, companies who are already in this space. So that is where I believe that today Indian investment space is more of family offices, more of private individuals. It's not for the VCs or the PEs at this stage because their, the understanding is more of IRR and any kind of return on ROIs kind of a thing, which cannabis industry today is more of R&Ds and more of, proving of efficacies and trials, and a lot of, research has to be done for this industry to become a possible large kind of acceptance of many VCs to take into consideration. And most importantly, it's a sunrise industry where there is a lot of, proving of facts and legalities have to be done first. And there is, interest from a lot of VCs, but I would also say that they are not very clear on the legalities, and there is a lot of restriction from their LPs and all when it comes to cannabis funding or any kind of, intoxicant funding. That is where they, do not have that kind of a confidence. And Indian regulations, as I mentioned, it's a state rule governed thing, which does not give them any clarity on the central government act. So they don't want to maybe, put in the commitments today, but there's a positive acceptance, there's a positive understanding. There are a lot of VCs around the bigger spaces who are interested in it, but they want the companies to reach 1 million, 2 million revenues. Then only that kind of a space, that kind of a investment option really comes for them. So I would, in a nutshell, say that there is interest, there is positive acceptance, but it's more on the family and the strategic alliance companies who are wanting to do it because they want to diversify into cannabis and have more products around it. But from the VC side, there is still wait and watch because the industry is still at a nascent stage. I would say total industry size today is not more than 100 crores, which is not what the VCs are really looking at and excited for. They want more of these products or more of efficacy trials to be done first and legalities to be proven. And that's when it basically becomes a very optimized kind of investment opportunity for these kind of companies and VCs.
Yeah. I'll add a couple of lines. I think one is, I think rightly so, the LP structure. I think Singapore domicile funds might have a hard time, getting into, even though one of the things is the coolness factor. I think everybody knows who we are because of it's, there's a lot of narcotic stuff in the news, a lot of cannabis busts and stuff that happened before, but at the same time, because we're a sunrise industry and talked about quite a bit in recent times, everybody knows who we are. I think that's not a problem at this point in the investment community. I think one is the LPs. The second is we are kind of an outlier, right? There is no comparable of how cannabis is structured in India to any other market, right? So in India, it's under Ayurveda, it's polyherbal, it's federally legal for medical, which is a big deal, but it's not federally legal in the way that America sees it, right? So I think that's really been the level of explanation that has to happen for a US VC to allocate something so far away, or an LP to understand. Because in India, until recently, Prohibition Partners, I think Steve and I pestered him a lot, and now he has removed the shading of illegal from India, which until 6 months ago was still shown as a pre-legal market, which is not true.
Right.
So I think that's the idea, is we don't fit the framework, like e-commerce or skill-based games. Everything is just a clone, right? But if you look at it's a clone with a different market, so it's easy to understand. So I think it'll take some time. And again, the federal legal that we have is still illegal in the eyes of most cannabis investors. But having said that, I think, like I said, the global movement towards polyherbal, towards sustainable, and just the understanding of cannabis for pain relief to begin with, will probably make things a lot easier going forward. And I agree with Delzaad. Once we all achieve a certain level of scale, and we'll start to become fall on the radar of some of the mainstream guys.
Absolutely. And finally, Abhishek, how often do you feel frustrated because of the slow changes in laws and regulation? How often do you throw up your hands in despair and say, "Damn it, have had enough"?
You know what? We got in. I would say you got to give credit to Delzaad and the lads from Boheco, because they've been around from when there was nothing, right? So there was basically, they were up against the wall literally every 5 minutes. So when we came in 4 years ago, I think there was a level of understanding that we had. So we took time to understand the regulations, especially around the scale that we've achieved in terms of doctors, right? That's something we kind of pioneered in the market because we took some time to understand. Yeah, it's heavily regulated. I mean, there is obviously 100, times a month when chemist stores come to us and say, "Hey, can we carry a product?" And we're like, "No, you can't, because you're not a doctor." Those kind of, or there's times when people say, "Yeah, I want to buy a huge amount, and can you sell it to me in by kilo, the sexual wellness product?" And we say, "No, we can't do that. It's illegal." So I think we don't get the the ease of distribution of prescription products that pharma gets. We don't have the funding depth to make really rash decisions. Like if you make one rash decision with in this funding environment, you could get to see yourself getting wiped out, either regulatory or out of cash. So I think we're operating on those. And then I would like to mention, we're always on a little bit of a back foot as founders in cannabis with everybody. I mean, I'll give you an example of some guy who you get in an argument with. He'll threaten NDPS. And because of how this overhang is, listen, at this point, we're not because we have PIMCHA, we all know each other, we all kind of got each other's background, at least on the regulatory side, we are a little bit less afraid of getting, kind of framed into situations like this, because it happens, right? So I think that's one thing that's changed a little bit now that we've organized ourselves, because something happens to somebody, it happens to all of us. So I think we are able to access legal resources, we're able to access, Delzaad. And so I think that's kind of a little bit of the frustration that's gone. But yeah, I mean, watching how we've all grown 6-7x year on year, all the major players have seen significant growth in revenue, but still being off radar because, just as Delzaad said, right, the regulations are not 100% crystal clear. So yeah, that frustrates from time to time, but the opportunity is where it's at, and we'll keep on.
Yeah, thank you, Delzaad, and thank you, Abhishek, for your deep insights and perspectives and taking that time out and dropping by to have this conversation for Unusual Suspects. Thank you so much, both.
Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you. Pleasure.